You know, when we think of scripting something, and it's all about scripts as far as learning scripts in terms of real estate, whether you're on the phone, whether it's your listing presentation. But normally we think of scripts in terms of actors and actresses, but that's not really true. Actually, scripting is a way of life. Everything that you have done in your life has been scripted. Whether you called it that or whether you realized it or not, it actually was scripted from a baby. Think if you have children. Do you think they know which buttons to push to get you to do the things that they want you to do? Well, that's scripting. If you've ever held a job in your life and you were doing it well, then of course it was scripted. You knew what to do, when to do, and how to do it. And again, it came from scripting. When you go to med school, within the first 2 weeks of medical school, they issue you a cadaver, a dead person. I've often wondered why they don't give people live people to do work on. Well, the obvious reason is they want to know at the end of 4 years exactly how far to cut, how deep to go, and what they're going to see on the inside. It's scripted, and they've been learning that script for 4 years. When a pilot gets ready to fly a plane, they first walk around the plane on the outside, doing a pre-flight checklist of the outside of the plane. When they get inside, they pull out a pre-flight checklist, and they literally go over it. And that is, again, scripting. They probably know it by heart, but they've scripted it. That's what you have to do here. And scripting means that you must memorize the scripts. They have to be memorized. If you don't memorize the scripts, one of the things that you'll find yourself doing is simply ad-libbing. And once you start to do that, the longer, remember this statement, the longer you stay on the phone, the less likely you're going to be to make an appointment. Because what you're doing is waiting for the seller to ask you to list the property, or ask you to come over on an appointment. And the same thing is true in a listing presentation. If you don't ask for the order, you're not going to get it. I hate to admit this, but one of the longest listing presentations that I've ever been on lasted 7 hours. I got there at 11 o'clock in the morning. I left at 6 o'clock at night. I had lunch with them. I had dinner with them. I did not get the listing. And the reason came apparent to me a little while later. At the time that this listing appointment took place, I was managing an office for the guy's company, and one of the other managers, this is when our managers were selling, she and I were competitors in offices, but we also were really good friends, and we started playing a game. And the game was that if I went on a listing presentation and didn't get the listing, then I had to call her and give her the name and the address, and in turn she would call and try to get the listing. And obviously if she did, she'd call and rag on me, or I'd call and rag on her. What the seller didn't realize was that we split the listing. The only person that actually went on the deal sheet, which is the accounting form to disperse the commission, was the person that got the listing. But, I'm sorry, as far as the MLS was concerned, the only person that was on there was the person that got the listing. But on the deal sheet to disperse the commission, both of us were on there. The next day, after that 7-hour appointment, she called me, and she told me she got the listing. And she's ragging on me and everything. And I said to her, Jane, I'm just curious, how long were you there? And she said, I don't know, 45 minutes or so. And it was then that I realized something. I wasn't in that house to get a listing. I was in that house doing what I do best, talking. I was hoping to convince the seller through my talking and training that they're going to say, you seem to know it all, where do we sign? Well, they never said it, and I never asked for it, and I never got the listing. It didn't happen immediately, but approximately 3 months after that appointment, something hit me, and I started doing something, and it literally became a religious habit on a listing presentation. And that was on a listing presentation. You will find on any listing agreement from any presentation that I go on, you will find on the bottom of it at least 1, 2, sometimes 3 and 4 check marks. The check marks represent each time I ask for the order. And if I walk out of a seller's house without the check marks on the bottom of the listing agreement, I wasn't there to get a listing. I was there simply talking. You've got to ask for the order. The same thing is true on the phone. If you don't ask for the appointment, they're not going to ask you to come over. So you have to be focused on what you need to say. That means memorizing the script. You'll literally memorize your listing presentation. You'll be able to adapt it, but you're adapting it to the personality of the person you're dealing with and also their needs, their motivation. But on the phone, it must be scripted. And then you become focused on asking for the appointment. Once you've done that a few times and you have that under your belt, then if you want to ad-lib a little bit, you can, because you're still focused on making the appointment. Let's look at developing a questionnaire to guide you through calling a buyer. Here's an example of one. By the way, if you're familiar with your keyboard on your computer, if you look on the top left corner, 3 keys in usually, there's a print screen key. If you want to do that right now, and by the way, hold down the alternate key when you hit the print screen key, and it'll eliminate all of the information about your computer at the bottom, and all you'll see is what you see on my screen. But in any case, if you'll do that, it sends it over to the clipboard, and then after the presentation today, you can go ahead and then paste it onto a WordPerfect or Microsoft Word, whatever you're using. But notice that this is a guide, and at the top you have the owner's name. My name is Phil Codger. May I have yours? Getting their name, phone number, email address, and then remember the ABC questions: area, bedrooms, costs, desires, and expected moving date. And then some additional questions that you could ask. And you don't want to bombard the seller with these questions. You ask a question and you let a response come out, and then you can engage possibly in conversation, then you ask another question. But the questions are, as you can see, is your home currently on the market? Now, if they say, no, it isn't, then at that time you need to look at this person not as a buyer, but as a listing. And you should go into listing mode. Because most of the, in fact, go back to, for just a minute, an open house. Most people don't really understand the true reason for an open house. And the true reason is not to find a buyer, and it's not to sell the house. I mean, the odds of selling that house are very, very slim indeed. But the real reason is because of getting listings. Most people that go out on open houses on the weekends are doing it because they're thinking in their mind, if I can find the perfect house, then I can go ahead and I can put an offer in. But the problem is that they don't realize that they have what is called frozen equity. And that means simply that their money right now is tied up in their own home, and they're going to have to sell that before they can actually buy a property. So what you need to do is look at that person that comes through as a buyer, as a seller, as opposed to a buyer. 3 questions you might want to write down that you can ask a buyer at an open house. Number 1 is, do you currently own a home? Number 2, is your home now on the market? And number 3, will you have to sell in order to buy? Now, if those 3 questions come back, yes, no, and yes, respectively, then obviously they're a listing and not a buyer. And right at the open house, you can go into the listing mode. This next question that's on the page, what feature would you, or no, that's the one after that, how large is your last home, how many square feet? That cost me a lot of money one time because I didn't ask that question. I lost a sale of a $600,000 home simply because I had convinced the person that they wanted a waterfront property. They said they had a boat up in Chicago and they were moving down here and they wanted to buy a bigger boat. And I said, well, it'd be great to put it behind your house. And they said, sure. So we started looking for waterfront properties, couldn't find any, and meeting their needs. And so in turn, they started renting a property, and I kept looking but never found anything. And then one time I found a property that I thought was ideal for them, called them, and they told me that they had already started to build a house. And they were building it 20 miles west of the ocean. And I asked them, why did you decide to build so far west and not on the water? And they said, well, water was nice, and it would have been nice to have a boat there. But I realized later that that isn't really what I needed. What I needed was space. You see, I have 6 children. And I asked them, I knew how many children they had, but hey, if I had asked them, how many square feet do you have in your home in Chicago, I never would have shown them property on the water. They had 6,000 square feet in their home in Chicago. A waterfront home in Fort Lauderdale with 6,000 square feet, you're looking at $2.5 million. And I was showing them properties that had 2,000 to 3,000 square feet on the water. So again, it cost me a lot of money. What about a garage, dining room, pool, family room, basement? Where do you and your spouse work? I asked this question because I want to put a radius around their place of employment to be able to find communities, and the driving time is a key, and that's the next question on it. What would you want to be your maximum driving time to work, so that I can put a parameter out there to see exactly how far out they're going to want to travel by the major thoroughfares, and then in turn all of the subdivisions that are going to meet their needs. Do you have any special interests, such as boating, golf, tennis? What do your children like to do? And how old are your children? And then 2 final questions to ask. What other ads have you circled? And make sure that they understand that you have access to all properties. And if they do call a broker, in most cases, what's going to happen is that they're going to get the floor person, and the floor person is simply going to say, well, I've got to put you in with the other person that has the listing, and they're delayed, and so on. They want to talk to somebody right now that can give them information. So tell them whenever they find an ad or see a sign, all they have to do is call you, give them your cell number, and then in turn you could find the information for them in an instant. And then the final question, when would be the most convenient time for you to preview this home?